So before I start this video, I just want to give a little explanation as to where I've been for the last, So I was planning on hitting this channel to get more consistent, and as soon as I was on the way to doing that, I caught the thing that kind of has been messing the world up. I caught the thing we're not allowed to talk about, and because of that, I've been in recovery for the last couple of weeks. I wasn't able to move around, and I wasn't able to really do anything creative, like at all. Like I wasn't able to think, I wasn't able to do anything that drained my energy at all. Otherwise it would reflect back on my recovery process. I wouldn't be able to recover properly if I was doing anything, really. All I could do was sit and basically play Persona 5. That's literally all I could do. And believe me, I tried to do things. I tried to record. Oh, first of all, I couldn't really talk. I was constantly in a fight of losing my breath, and luckily it wasn't like I didn't have to go to the hospital. I was able to manage my symptoms at home, but it was a rough time. And I'm pledging now to try to be more consistent with this channel and my uploads. And I've been trying to get on this for a while, but I'm not gonna lie, it's been a fairly rough year for me. Not even with the whole thing that we're not allowed to talk about, but just in general that I don't really want to get into in my personal life. It's been a hard time, and I've been doing my best to kind of manage it, but I've lost track of that a couple of times. And now I'm in the battle to get to consistency, and I'm excited to finally get there. Now, I was planning on making this video when Ghost of Tsushima came out, and obviously that didn't happen because I got sick. Because of that, this video is gonna be a little late, but damn it, I fucking wrote this script and I'm going to release it, damn it. I am not letting this thing go to waste, and I figured it was still timely, but I figured I'd make this video. That is all the Infamous games ranked. And so, disclaimer, I'm not going to be talking about the Vampire DLC as its own thing. Well, first of all, because I haven't played it, and second of all, I'm going to be including First Light as its own thing because it has a platinum trophy, so therefore it should stand alone as its own thing. So the Blood Night Moon isn't going to be a thing, even though it had a lot of charm. I'm not including it on this list. So coming into this video, I thought I had mostly figured out in terms of what this list was going to be. I fully thought a certain game was the #1, and it was obvious to why, and I was like, oh, okay, it's gonna be easy. But when I went to writing it, and I really sat down, I really thought about it, and I'm like, oh, is this actually how it's going to be? Everything kind of switched around, and because of that, it made me really appreciate everything about this series. I really sat down, I thought about it, and I remembered just kind of everything I loved about this series and what made this series so great. And it made me miss Infamous. I miss Infamous. And once I sat down and really went through everything, I realized that while I'm happy that Infamous is a thing and I would like another one, I'm happy Sucker Punch made Ghost of Tsushima, because you could tell by the time that they got to Second Son that the same gameplay loop for technically 4 games, since First Light is its own thing, you could tell that they want to start working on something else. Now, into the video. This is a video of the Infamous games ranked from least to best. Obviously, I want to clarify that I love this series and I love these games. I remember playing the demo for the first Infamous in a Target, and I immediately fell in love. This series has a very special place in my heart, and just because a game is lower or higher doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It's just, there's a lot of factors to consider when making a list, and sometimes things just kind of fall where they may. Disclaimer, this is my opinion, and if you disagree with it, yeah, awesome. Please let me know what your ranking is for all the games. I would love to hear it. And without further ado, let's get started. So, Infamous First Light. I have it here at the bottom because it's a standalone DLC. I really enjoyed the character and story of Fetch and what she was going through. She's actually one of my favorite Infamous characters. With the loss of her brother, her interactions with Augustine, the neon powers were my favorite actually to use in Second Son. I know a lot of people's neon powers were their favorites as well, but even with it being 4 to 5 hours long, there was a feeling in the back of my head that really felt like this whole DLC was unnecessary. And why? Fetch's story was already told in Second Son, and it was told in a very awesome way as well. All of a sudden, you're Delsin, and this crazy lady is like murdering people, and she has these laser powers, and you find out that she's this chick, and then you organically kind of find out more about her, and that was one of the most interesting things about Second Son, was finding out about Fetch and finding out who she is as a person, and you literally found out her whole backstory, and that just leaves you feeling like First Light is really unnecessary and expands on stuff that we mostly already knew. And even if it is one of the most interesting characters in the series, it just, the feeling of this whole thing being unnecessary just was in the back of my head just the entire time. Even though I played and I loved every second of it, it's just objectively this DLC didn't need to happen, but it did. Now, on to Second Son. Take a drink of my coffee first, hold on. Let me just start by saying, Second Son is without a doubt one of the funnest games I have ever played, ever. I would just sit down and just playing this game, the pure gameplay was some of the most fun I've ever had in a video game ever. I loved everything about it. Of course, it helps that it was in Seattle, which is one of my favorite places ever. It honestly increased my love for beanies. I immediately started wearing beanies because of this. The soundtrack was phenomenal. Just listen. Just perfect, and having powers was something I didn't know that I needed. Yes, I know having multiple powers was something done in other games, Infamous 2 in particular, fire and ice, yada yada, but being able to switch between different powers was so, they actually felt different. How you moved was impacted, combat tactics were impacted. Switching to a different power had real differences that went into the strategy of combat. Neon was different than Smoke because you could run fast and insta-kill enemies when shooting them in the right place. Concrete was just an overall powerful thing at the expense of mobility. Video let you go invisible and summon angels while having lock-on power shots. Every power had strengths and weaknesses, with Smoke feeling like just an all-around middle-of-the-road Master of None type ability, which is very symbolic, Smoke being his first power, because Delsin is a all-arounder and Master of None type, so that's just a little bit of a shout out, him being able to use Smoke. Smoke is Delsin's first power, which is the middle of the road, kind of good at everything but not great at anything power, and that's kind of who Delsin is when it comes to all of his powers, because he has all these powers and he gets proficient with them, but he's not a master at any of them, which is shown when he interacts with the people that he gets the powers from. Like, he's nowhere near as good as Neon as Fetch. Like, the Smoke guy uses powers we never even dreamed of, and don't even get me started on Eugene or Augustine. So it's just it's a little bit of a shout out there. I wanted to give a little thumbs up in terms of the storytelling. But back to the video. Liberating Seattle felt amazing and has the best open world gameplay loop until Spider-Man PS4, which I'm not gonna lie, I don't even know if Spider-Man PS4 is better than it, but I would say they equal out, because Spider-Man was also one of the most objectively fun games I ever played. Infamous Second Son had a certain charm to it that really stuck to me. Its soundtrack, its setting, and its gameplay hit me in a certain way that just screamed yes to every part of my system. And don't forget, tagging was also one of the best parts of the game. They were always very creative. But there was two major things weighing down on it that I just couldn't overlook when I came to the placement of it on the list. And that was its overall narrative, which isn't bad at all, but it falls short in a lot of ways, and it should have honestly been tweaked. This isn't something that I really want to get into in this video because I had another video talking about Delsin in particular and his overall interactions with the narrative, and completely dissecting what went wrong with that narrative would take too long for this video. The second thing is it's just too short. I know playing it twice makes it longer, but believe me, I play every Infamous game twice when I'm playing them for the first time. But there are people who play games once. There are people who played Infamous once, and for just one playthrough, it just was a little short. And don't get this wrong, Delsin wasn't a bad protagonist per se. He was definitely a change from Cole. He was a brighter, more optimistic force than Cole's stoicism, but he wasn't particularly interesting. His whole character kind of bottles down to, I love my brother and I love having powers. That's how I would describe him to somebody. That's essentially his two things. I love my brother / tribe and I love having powers. That is his entire character in a nutshell. But I honestly do want to make a video dissecting Delsin's character and why the hero system doesn't work with him, but why it worked with Cole. So hold on to that in the future, because I do plan on making that very soon. Now, on to my next ranking, which I'm going to be honest, when I first started, it was my #1 choice, but after thinking of this, I had to put it here. The #2 spot goes to Infamous 2. But what do you mean? This possibly couldn't be #2. It beats Infamous 1 in every way. And my response to you is no, it doesn't. Infamous 2 graphically does. It stepped everything up cinematically. There's actually cutscenes now versus just the audio, the story told audioly. So I guess if you want to look at it from there, it ramped up. Infamous 2 ramped up everything that Infamous 1 did. Had a lot more budget put into it, and its production value was greatly raised. But Infamous 2 is part 2 to the story of Cole and the Beast, set up by Kessler at the end of Infamous 1. Yes, Infamous 2 is amazing. Introducing 2 power sets was great. Having the amp felt amazing, and natural progression to the, I will say, somewhat basic feeling combat of Infamous 1 in terms of him punching things. Infamous 2 felt so good to play and to move around. Cole and his interactions with his friends felt amazing, and the good ending felt like a fitting conclusion to the series. I mean, we didn't know the Infamous Second Son was going to come out, but at the end, we thought this was the end of the story. The good ending is canon, so I personally think it would have been a lot more interesting if he went for the bad ending route, but that's another video for another day, and there's problems with that. So, with all things being said, why not the top spot? And I had to think about this for a while too, because going into this video, or going into writing this, Infamous 2 was the top spot. I thought it was better. I was like, whenever I would talk about this with my friends, I would think, yeah, Infamous 2 is better. It's the better Infamous game. It's the best Infamous game in the series. And what it comes down to is narrative, villains, and charm. So let's start with the first one. The first game had an undeniable charm to it that the second one couldn't fully replicate, and this came with the production value. The first game just had a feel to it that the second game couldn't fully capture. The second game, everything looked cleaner, and just the feel of being in this drudgy city and like this noir superhero game was kind of lost. That there was no more noirness to it, and it didn't feel as much like a superhero story as the first one did. Neurosis was awesome, but it didn't have the same feel that Empire City had, and I had way more of a connection to Empire City than I did to Neurosis. In Neurosis, I felt out of place. I felt like a visitor, a stranger. In Neurosis and Empire City, I felt like I was defending my home, and I think that was part of the issue, because Neurosis was an awesome location. It was an awesome setting. It had a lot of personality. It just didn't have the feeling. It just didn't generate the same feelings that Empire City did. And because of that, the experience didn't resonate as strongly as the first one did. And making the second one feel less like a comic book and more like a really good adaptation of a comic book. It just didn't have the vibe to it. And don't get me wrong, it's still Infamous, and it's still the Infamous experience. It's just there's things that Infamous does extraordinarily well that Infamous 2 doesn't fully recapture. Gone is the fate of being quarantined, and the looming evil that's watching over you it doesn't feel like there's this overburdening presence. Yes, I know there's the Beast, but that is literally like a countdown versus Kessler, who had this aura about him that, I'm going to be honest, wasn't matched by the Beast. The Beast is awesome, the Beast is powerful, and I love how the Beast was created, but Kessler just had this mysterious vibe, this crazy, and him really set the tone for the series going forward. He stalked Cole. He even killed Triss, and finding out who he really was insane. And it was one of the craziest video game endings I'd ever experienced at the time. And it just had a lot more charm than, oh, I'm the Beast, I'm so powerful. And even the final boss just felt so much more satisfying. And just, I'm talking about Infamous 1 in this terms, because final boss for Infamous 2 was great, but the final boss of Kessler for Infamous 1 was just insane. Now, I'm not talking about endings when I'm talking about these two games, because good ending from Infamous 2 was a very satisfying conclusion to the series. And don't get me wrong, the ending for Infamous 1 was also amazing. Finding out Kessler's everything and then finding out the Beast was coming was insane. But finally beating Kessler and finding out the truth behind everything was just something else. And compared to Kessler, the mayor or Bugman, I don't even remember his name. It's like Pritchard, something like that. Just didn't, he was missing it. He didn't have the coolness or mystique of Kessler or even the other members of the first Infamous cast. And honestly, it just comes back to charm. All of this goes back to narrative as well. The first game had a much stronger story. It felt like you were unraveling this great mystery and this narrative, and the second felt a lot more by the books. Gone were the days of listening to Moira and figuring out what Kessler wanted, or deciding if you should use your powers for good or be selfish in the trying times taking over Empire City. The first game did something that was incredible. It managed to make a binary good and evil system work in its favor. The second games was fine. By the time we got to Second Son, it didn't really work as well, but the first game, just except for production value, does everything that the second game does except better. It has more charm, and the gameplay loop is essentially the same. It's a little toned down, which I think adds to Infamous 1 in its favor. But Infamous 1 overall, I would say, is the better game. Oh, this was hard. I had to get my coffee to do this one. The second game was great, and for a long time I thought it was my favorite. But then I remembered everything I loved about the first game. Having to climb around the prison, and then Alden's tower. Everything about the first Infamous worked, from all of its characters to their interactions with Cole. And don't get me wrong, the second entry has a charm, and in the second entry, that charm was lost. Not completely, obviously. It's still Infamous, but you can tell. It's, like I said before, this one feels more like an adaptation of a comic book, and the first Infamous felt like just a straight comic book. Now, with that being said, this was all my opinion. Feel free to disagree with me in the comments below and let me know what you think. I personally am looking forward to playing Ghost of Tsushima, but I have other projects in the works for now. This is kind of inspiring me to go on a more of an Infamous binge, and I have some ideas that I want to pursue, but I also have some ideas for some prototype videos that I also wanted to make, and that full disclaimer, after I make these prototype videos, it's probably going to be the last prototype videos I make for a while. I want to do other things besides prototype, but don't worry, things are still cool. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, liking, commenting, subscribing, doing all the stuff that you guys do. I'm not going to be super preachy about it. If you guys like me, you'll subscribe. I'm not going to beg for anything. And yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you guys next time. Please be safe and try to stand tall in these trying times. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys next time.